Ons eerste gas is in die ateljee, Elsa.
Ons gesels vanoggend oor waterbeperkings wat onlangs weer 'n realiteit geword het. En ons fokus ook onder andere op waterbesparing. Ons verwelkom vir Dhesigen Naidoo, die hoofuitvoerende beampte van die Waternavorsingskommissie by ons in die ateljee. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Good morning.
Let's start with briefly tell us who you are and what you specialize in.
The Water Research Commission is a national research agency. It's a specialist in water and sanitation issues. It's fairly unique in the world. It's been in South Africa for 45 years now, so this is one of the mainstay institutions in the country. It in fact was born out of a drought. The drought of the 60s, people put their heads together and said, we're a dry country, we need to know much more about water and how we deal with it, and they developed an R&D institution, and that's who we are.
Very interesting. What is the current situation in terms of water restrictions in South Africa? I mean, which areas currently have restrictions?
Let me preamble that a little bit. I mean, we've just come out of a very intense El Nino cycle. In fact, it's been the most intense in 20 years worldwide. We hope we're at the end of it. All indications are with the normal rainfall patterns in Asia that we might come out of it, but we're not in a normal rainfall pattern yet. We've been, depending on your perspective, 3 to 5 years of drought. Hopefully we're at the end of the cycle. But until we have normal rains, or possibly a La Nina event, which is a small flood event, we're not going to be in a normal pattern for the next 3 or so years. So currently, all around the country, we are in water restrictions. The metros in Gauteng, the metros in KwaZulu-Natal and Western Cape are most intense, but there are several small towns and cities all over the country that are either already in restrictions or considering even going into rationing of water.
I want to interrupt you there. I mean, it's a worldwide thing now with the weather. And people say like the third world war will be around water. Is that far-fetched? Or is water going to become like a commodity more precious than gold?
It's not far-fetched at all. I'll give you 3 responses to that. First is we've been fighting about water for a long, long time. We haven't recognized it as a war phenomenon. Secondly, if you look at places like the Gulf region, there's more drilling happening around finding water in the underground resources than there is for oil.
Sure.
And this is what we're doing all over the world. This is not far-fetched at all. And as restrictions get closer and closer and there's more and more scarcity, we're going to go bigger and bigger into this phenomenon. The World Economic Forum has, for the last 6 years, put water as one of the top 5 risks to the global economy. This is how intense this matter is.
Sure.
I want to ask you, which areas are most at risk for a serious shortage of water?
Well, there are areas and there are sectors. Let me start with the sectors. The highest risk sector in the South African environment around drought conditions is unmistakably the agricultural sector. Our food security is definitely at risk. And there are major shifts that we need to make in order to resolve that. Secondly, South Africa is a very water-intensive economy. We're a primary industry economy. It's about primary production and mining, water-intensive activities. Our power sources are highly water-intensive. We are in trouble if we don't get into either better water management or more sources of water.
The guy, like in the cities, the metros, like grass, you've got a lawn, and it takes a lot of water. You think we must like get a shift so people can take it out and rather do vegetable gardens? Because, I mean, that's the thing. You're basically wasting water to have a nice lawn.
You're absolutely right. Lawns are probably the most wasteful way we can use water at home. And all of us do it.
Yeah.
We have the strange notion that the beautiful English garden concept.
Yes.
It works well in England because it works for English climatic conditions. It cannot work for the South African condition. But to extend that a little bit further, we have a very water-intensive lifestyle. And one of the problems is that we have been so good at water engineering in this country. So you live in Gauteng, and I bet you don't realize this, but technically Gauteng is in permanent drought. Its supply does not meet its demand on the normal rainfall patterns. You would not know that if you drove around in Gauteng. That's because we have this wonderful scheme linked to Lesotho, and then 12 other dams in Gauteng that are regulated to make sure that we are in water all of the time. And I think what that has done is that it's organized for us to become a lot less water aware. We take it for granted, and this is a very big part of our problem.
And we think it is just agriculture. We spoiled in the cities and then the metros. You think if you say drought, you're thinking, that's the farmers. And actually, you're part of the problem. You're part of messing it up.
Well, let me give you an idea of how wasteful we are. As a country, we are the 30th driest country in the world. Yeah, not many people know
that,
this. Yeah, the world average for use per person per day is 177 liters per person per day. This is not your individual use. This is the use in the economy divided by the number of people. Now, you would think that South Africa, being the 30th driest country in the world, would be a lot lower than that. We're not. We're at 235 liters per person per day. This is the level of our waste. And then if you consider that the majority of people who live in the rural environments or the small towns use a lot less than that because they don't have access to water, it gives you an idea of how wasteful we are in the cities.
In the metros, sure.
Mr. Naidoo, I want you to explain to us where exactly does South Africa's water come from?
Well, the majority of South Africa's water is surface water. It's the river system of South Africa. And we get some of our water from the underwater aquifers. So we have a fair amount of groundwater around the country. But there are some important caveats. One is that we have very few major rivers in this country. The second is that 60% of the water in our rivers are actually international waters. We share these waters with our neighbors. They're not exclusively ours. And the third factor is that we import water. We're one of the countries in the world that's a net importer of water.
Sure.
We import it from the biggest water tower in southern Africa, and this is the Lesotho Highlands, and that is a major, major part of the water security for places like Gauteng.
And I mean, that project is massive, and it's been coming for years. Are they still expanding, or is it finished? And
it's not finished.
It's still not finished.
What is finished is phase one of the project. What is currently underway in planning and the beginning of implementation is the phase two of the project. And depending on our levels of water security going into the future, we may in fact consider possibilities like phase three. And this is a very important part for many reasons. One of the reasons is the water security for the country. But secondly, interestingly, because we share all these waters around us, the cooperation between the southern African states around water is in fact one of the best in the world. So to relate to your question previously around water wars, well, we're at least one place in the world that probably won't have one because we have great treaties and great cooperation agreements between the parties. And because of that, we're able to go forward in a much more peaceful way.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
When did South Africa's water problem start, or has there always been a problem?
South Africa's water problems have been there since the Khoisan were the only people around. We've always been a dry country. The last time South Africa was wet was about 250 million years ago, when the Karoo was an inland sea. But that's a long time ago.
That's a long time ago.
So in the modern era, we have been water scarce. But here's the thing. In 2016, there are some factors that make this more intense. There are many more of us than there used to be. The de facto population of this country is about 60 million people. That's a lot of people. Secondly, our planning environment is a little bit different from many other places. Other places usually build large towns and cities next to water because it's a vital resource. We have an entire city in Johannesburg that is nowhere near any major water resource. It was developed for a completely different reason. So the nature of our planning is very different. As we said before, we're a very water-intensive country. And all of these factors then start combining together, and it says that we are, in fact, more water scarce per person than we were before. And there's no scenario that we know of that's going to make this a little bit easier. Because we've done long-term climate change scenarios, for example, and the climate change scenarios are saying that our part of the world can only get hotter and drier. There's no opportunity to get wetter. So this is our fate.
And that was my question now, because years ago someone said like Bloemfontein will be desert area in 2050. Like the Kalahari is getting closer. So I don't know what's the truth behind it. Is it possible? But is our deserts expanding in the desert areas? Like, yeah.
Indeed, our desert areas have been expanding, and they've been expanding quite rapidly for a long while. But there are easy ways to mitigate that. You know, the issue around this is that we are in control. The anthropogenic factor will determine whether or not we're going to be water secure into the future or even more water scarce in the future. So what we do today matters a lot about what's going to happen tomorrow.
What are we currently doing to solve this problem, and what more could be done?
Well, we're doing a lot. At the macro level, there are these big supply schemes that are being envisaged, and some of them are in implementation. One is Lesotho Highlands, Phase 2. Then there are large dam schemes around the country, like the Mzimvubu Dam. We are raising up the existing dams, like Clan William, because the bottom line is you need much better storage capacity than you have now. And South Africa is largely a flat country. So we don't have too many opportunities for good dams around the system. So that's happening quite intensely. As part of the National Water Resources Strategy, we're also expanding our groundwater operations. We currently use less than 10% in the mix. We have the potential to go up to 30% from groundwater on condition that you recharge the groundwater. You can't suck it dry. So you've got to use it when you need it and then make sure that you fill it up again, because underwater storage is the best storage.
Yes.
You don't have the problems of evaporation and so forth. But there are more exciting things as well that are on the cards.
We've referred to what we are currently doing in order to solve this problem earlier. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, there are three sections of this that are really important to the strategy. The first is that we have a national campaign, and I guess you're now part of that national campaign, to be organized for people to be much more aware of the status of water in the country and what they can do about it. This is absolutely crucial. The second is that we're working on a concept of water stewardship, where we're bringing different players together around a joint ownership of the problem and joint implementers of the solution. So we have a thing called the Strategic Water Partnership Network between public players and private industry. And right now, this is the most successful chapter of the Water Resources Group of the World Economic Forum. The South Africa chapter is now being used as an example of what is possible elsewhere in the world. But the biggest thing is around ourselves as a country and many partners around the world trying to introduce a water and sanitation revolution to the world around doing things very differently from the way we used to do it before. So, for example, we have sanitation solutions in this country around the world that's more than 200 years old. We use high quality water to flush human waste 1 meter into a sewage system to get rid of it. This is far too wasteful. So we now have a range of new sanitation solutions together with big players like the Gates Foundation talking about the next revolution in the way we do this. To give you an idea, that if we switched as a country completely to new sanitation, we would save 30 to 40% of water in every household in the country every single day. And then we have to look at new ways around which we get water. Desalination is one of the big new things that we're looking at. Wastewater treatment is another big thing that we're looking at, because wastewater treatment uses energy, it increases your carbon emissions, and having smarter solutions around how to do that. In fact, converting your wastewater treatment plants into energy generators is what we're looking at into the future. All of these measures are going to organize for us to have much higher levels of water security, but simultaneously it's going to organize for us to have much more sustainable development options in our systems and an ability to be resilient to climate change. Because one of the things that we've signed up to as a country in the UN system is the SDGs. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are saying that in the next 15 years, not longer than that, by 2030, we're going to organize for everyone in this country, in fact, everyone around the world, to have access to safe water and improve sanitation. In order to make that happen, the other things need to happen alongside it. It is nothing short other than a revolution in water and sanitation. And South Africa really has an opportunity to lead.
There's a viewer, Kuba, with a question to say, why can't we stop the water in the rivers before it goes into the sea? Isn't that just a waste?
Well, it's a useful question and a really useful idea, and there's at least one place in the world that is doing it right now. In Singapore, the Singapore River, at its mouth, is actually dammed with a barrage. like we have on the Vaal Dam.
Yes.
And there's fresh water in the inside, and there's a careful way in which they control the balance between the fresh water and the salt water on the outside. It's a very difficult solution. It needs some very special engineering. And also, we have unique ecosystem environments called estuaries. And we depend on those estuaries for a whole range of other things in the ecological cycle. Those will then get compromised with such a solution in certain areas. So Isimangaliso, for example, couldn't do this. But it's an idea that's worth exploring. And it's something that we are looking at, looking for the right kinds of sites to do it. I mean, one of the places that's become quite important recently has been Manzamtoti in the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal, where you had the reverse problem happening during the drought. Because there was so little water going down the river into the sea, there was actually seawater intrusion back from the sea back into the river system.
Yes.
So it's the reverse problem, which will also be solved by damming. That is a very useful idea to explore.
Ek dink ek het nou 'n vraag van jou gesteel, maar ons gaan definitief weer gesels oor hierdie water en ek dink dis baie interessant.
It was a very interesting discussion. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. En dit was dan Dhesigen Naidoo, hoofuitvoerende beampte van die Waternavorsingskommissie.
Ja, en ek dink daar's nog baie vrae, so ons sal definitief die gas teruggee vir nog vrae en ek is nou so selfs dors vir 'n glasie water. Maar as jy nou ietsie verloor het oor die naweek en jy's nie verseker nie, hier's vir jou 'n oplossing.